The cameras were rolling. The audience was laughing. Steve Harvey was in his element, doing what he'd done 1,000 times before on Family Feud, turning ordinary moments into comedy gold. But then he saw her, an elderly woman in the front row of the audience, maybe 75, 80 years old, sitting perfectly still while everyone around her laughed and clapped. Her hands were folded in her lap. Her eyes were fixed on Steve, but there was something in her expression that made him stop mid-sentence. Steve Harvey has hosted thousands of shows. He's seen millions of faces and audiences. But every once in a while, he sees something that cuts through all the noise, all the performance, all the television magic, and reminds him why he does what he does. This was one of those moments. Steve was setting up a joke, about to deliver the punchline that would bring the house down, when he noticed her wiping her eyes. Not laughing so hard you're crying tears. Real tears. He stopped talking. The audience didn't notice at first. They were still riding the wave of the previous laugh. But Steve's attention had shifted completely. Hold on, Steve said, waving his hand to quiet the crowd. Ma'am, you all right? The woman looked startled, like she'd been caught doing something she shouldn't. She nodded quickly, forcing a smile. I'm fine, baby. You keep going. But Steve Harvey doesn't miss much. And he definitely doesn't miss pain. Nah, Steve said, walking toward the edge of the stage. Something's going on. Talk to me. The woman shook her head. It's nothing. I don't want to interrupt your show. You're not interrupting anything, Steve said. This is my show, and right now, I want to know what's got you crying in my audience. The studio fell silent. The contestants at the podiums stood awkwardly, not sure what was happening. The producers in the control room started panicking. This wasn't in the script. This wasn't planned. They had a schedule to keep. But Steve Harvey wasn't moving. The woman took a shaky breath. My husband, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. He loved this show. We watched it every night for 30 years. Every single night. It was our thing. Steve nodded slowly. Was. The woman's lip trembled. He passed 3 months ago, and this is the first time I've watched the show since he died. My daughter brought me here today. She thought it would be good for me. But sitting here without him, watching you do what you do, She couldn't finish. The tears came harder now. Steve didn't hesitate. He walked down the steps, off the stage, into the audience. Security moved to stop him. There are protocols, insurance issues, 100 reasons why the host shouldn't leave the stage during a live taping. Steve waved them off. He knelt down in front of the woman. Right there in the front row, cameras still rolling. What was his name? Steve asked softly. Walter, she said. Walter Eugene Morrison. Everyone called him Gene. Tell me about Gene, Steve said. The woman looked surprised. You want to hear about him? I got time, Steve said. We all got time. Her name was Doris. She'd met Gene at a church picnic in 1968. He'd been wearing a ridiculous hat. One of those fishing hats with lures stuck all over it. And he'd asked her to dance even though there was no music playing. I thought he was crazy, Doris said, laughing through her tears. But he just started humming right there in the middle of the picnic, and he took my hand and we danced. People were staring at us like we'd lost our minds. But Gene didn't care. He never cared what people thought. They got married 6 months later, had 3 kids, built a life in a small town in Ohio where everybody knew everybody and nothing much ever changed, which is exactly how they liked it. Gene worked at the post office for 40 years. Every morning, he'd kiss Doris goodbye at exactly 7:15. Every evening, he'd come home at exactly 5:30, and they'd have dinner together. And every night at 7 o'clock, they'd sit on the couch and watch Family Feud. It was his favorite show, Doris said. He'd yell at the TV when people gave stupid answers. He'd argue with you, Steve, like you could hear him. He'd say, Steve, you're wrong about that one, like y'all were having a conversation. Steve smiled. Sounds like my kind of guy. He was, Doris said. He was everybody's kind of guy. Gene had been diagnosed with lung cancer 2 years ago. Never smoked a day in his life, but cancer doesn't care about that. They fought it together, the chemo, the radiation, the endless doctor appointments. Through it all, they never missed Family Feud. Even on the worst days, when Gene was so sick he could barely keep his eyes open, he'd insist on watching. Doris would prop him up with pillows, hold his hand, and they'd watch Steve Harvey make people laugh. It was the only hour of the day where he'd forget he was sick, Doris said. Where we'd both forget. We'd just laugh and guess answers and argue about whether chicken was a better answer than turkey for Thanksgiving dinner. Steve chuckled. Chicken's not even on the board. That's what I told him. Doris said, her eyes brightening for just a moment. But Gene swore it should be. 3 months ago, on a Tuesday evening at 6:45, 15 minutes before Family Feud, Gene had a stroke. Massive. Instant. He was gone before the ambulance arrived. Doris had been in the kitchen making popcorn. Their routine. Every night, she'd make popcorn, bring it out at 7 o'clock, and they'd watch the show together. She'd come back into the living room with the bowl, ready to settle in for their show, and found him slumped over in his recliner. I dropped the popcorn, Doris said quietly. It went everywhere, and all I could think was, Gene's gonna be mad I made a mess. Isn't that stupid? My husband was dying, and I was worried about popcorn on the carpet. That's not stupid, Steve said. That's shock. That's your brain trying to protect you from something too big to process all at once. Doris nodded, tears streaming down her face. I haven't watched the show since. I couldn't. Every time I try, I just see that empty chair, that stupid recliner where he'd sit every night. My daughter, she kept telling me I needed to move on, to do the things Gene and I used to do together. She thought bringing me here would help. But Steve, I don't know if I want to move on. Moving on feels like leaving him behind. Steve took both of Doris's hands in his. Let me tell you something about moving on. Moving on doesn't mean forgetting. It doesn't mean leaving Gene behind. It means taking him with you. Every laugh, every memory, every stupid argument about whether chicken belongs on the Thanksgiving board. You take that with you. He squeezed her hands. Gene's not in that recliner. He's in here. Steve pointed to Doris's heart. And every time you laugh at this show, every time you yell at the TV like he used to, that's Gene right there with you. You're not leaving him behind. You're honoring him by living. Doris sobbed openly now. Steve pulled her into a hug, right there in the audience, and the entire studio watched in stunned silence. When Steve finally pulled back, he looked at Doris with absolute seriousness. You know what we're going to do? We're going to dedicate this whole episode to Gene. Every question, every answer, every ridiculous thing that happens today, it's all for Walter Eugene Morrison. And you're going to watch it, and you're going to laugh, and you're going to yell at me when I'm wrong, just like Gene would have. Deal. Doris nodded, unable to speak. Steve stood up, addressed the entire studio. Y'all heard that? This episode is for Gene Morrison. Man never missed a show in 30 years. Let's make sure this one's worth watching. The audience erupted in applause. The contestants were crying. Even the camera operators were wiping their eyes. Subscribe and leave a comment, because what happened next changed everything. Steve climbed back on stage, but something had shifted in him. This wasn't just another taping anymore. This was personal. He pointed to the first contestant family. What's y'all's name? The Jenkins family, the captain said. All right, Jenkins family. You're playing for Gene tonight. You better bring it. He turned to the opposing family. And y'all, the Patterson family. Patterson family, you're also playing for Gene. This man watched this show for 30 years. Don't y'all embarrass me in front of Gene's widow. The energy in that studio was electric. Every question Steve asked, every answer given, felt like it carried weight. The contestants played harder. The audience cheered louder. And Doris, sitting in the front row, started to smile. When someone gave a ridiculous answer, name something you'd find in a toolbox, and the guy said hammer, Steve looked directly at Doris. Gene would have said hammer too, wouldn't he? Doris laughed. A real laugh. He would have said screwdriver and argued with you about it. See, Steve pointed at the contestant. Gene's got your back from heaven, brother. The studio roared with laughter. Halfway through the show, during a commercial break, Steve did something unprecedented. He invited Doris up on stage. Come on up here, he said. Gene had a front row seat for 30 years. Today, you're getting the best seat in the house. Doris was hesitant, but her daughter, sitting next to her, encouraged her to go. With shaky legs, Doris made her way to the stage. Steve brought out his personal chair, the one he sits in between takes, and placed it right next to the podium. This is Gene's seat now. You sit right here and watch the rest of this show the way he would have watched it. For the rest of the taping, Doris sat on stage, watching everything unfold from the best vantage point in the studio. And Steve would periodically turn to her and say, "Gene would have gotten that one, wouldn't he?" Or, "Gene's up there yelling at me right now. I can feel it." And Doris would laugh, really laugh, the kind of laugh that had been buried under 3 months of grief. When the show wrapped, Steve did something else that no one expected. He asked the crew to keep the cameras off. What happened next was just for the people in that room. Steve sat down next to Doris on stage. "I want to tell you something," he said. "I lost my father years ago, and for the longest time, I couldn't do certain things we used to do together because it hurt too much. Couldn't listen to certain songs. Couldn't go to certain places. I thought avoiding those things would make the pain less. But it didn't. It just made the world smaller." He looked at Doris with the kind of understanding that only comes from shared experience. "One day, I was driving past this barbecue joint my dad used to take me to, and I almost kept driving. But something made me stop. I went in, ordered what we always used to order, sat at our usual table. And you know what happened? I felt him there. Not in a ghost way, but in a memory way. In the smell of the food, in the sound of the place. He was there because I brought him there. In my heart." Doris was crying again, but softer now. "How do you do it? How do you keep living when half of you is gone?" "You do it one day at a time," Steve said. "Some days will be harder than others. Some days you'll forget he's gone for a second, and then you'll remember, and it'll hit you all over again like it's the first time. But some days you'll laugh at something stupid, and you'll think, Gene would have loved that, and it won't hurt quite as bad. Those days will come more often if you let them." He stood up, helped Doris to her feet. "Gene loved this show. He loved watching me make people laugh. And I guarantee you, he'd want you to keep watching, keep laughing, keep living. Not instead of remembering him, but because you remember him." Before Doris left that night, Steve gave her something. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "This is my personal number. Not the studio number, not the booking number. Mine. If you ever need to talk, if you ever need anything, you call me. And I mean that." Doris looked at the paper, then at Steve. "Why are you doing all this for me? You don't even know me." Steve smiled. "Because Gene spent 30 years supporting me, watching my show, laughing at my jokes, being a loyal fan. The least I can do is support his wife when she needs it most. That's what Gene would have done." The episode aired 4 weeks later. Steve had insisted that the network include the moment with Doris. They wanted to cut it for time, but Steve refused. "If you cut Doris, I walk," he told them. "This is more important than any joke I'll make this season." They kept it in. The response was overwhelming. The network received thousands of letters, emails, calls. People sharing their own stories of loss. People thanking Steve for showing that kind of compassion on national television. But the most important response came from Doris herself. She sent Steve a handwritten letter. In it, she explained that after the taping, she'd gone home and sat in Gene's recliner for the first time since he died. She turned on Family Feud, a rerun, and she'd watched it. She'd laughed. She'd yelled at the TV. She'd felt Gene there with her. "You gave me permission to live again," she wrote. "You showed me that remembering doesn't have to mean suffering. Thank you for seeing me. Thank you for stopping your show for an old woman you didn't know. Thank you for honoring Gene." At the bottom of the letter, she'd included a photo. It was Gene, sitting in his recliner, wearing that ridiculous fishing hat from their first date, grinning at the camera. On the back, she'd written, "This is the man who loved your show. This is the man who made me laugh for 50 years. This is the man I'll love until I take my last breath. Thank you for making sure he wasn't forgotten." Steve framed that letter. It hangs in his dressing room, right next to his mirror, so he sees it every day before he goes on stage. 6 months after the taping, Doris called the number Steve had given her. Not because she needed help, but because she wanted to share good news. She'd started a grief support group at her church. Every Tuesday night, people who'd lost spouses would gather. They'd share stories, support each other, and at the end of every meeting, they'd watch Family Feud together. "We call it Gene's group," Doris told Steve over the phone. Because Gene started this in a way. His love for your show brought me to that studio. Your kindness brought me back to life. And now we're helping others do the same thing. Steve was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Gene would be proud of you. I think he would be, Doris said. I think he is. Steve sent a TV to the church, a big one, with a note that read, for Gene's group. May you always laugh together. Share and subscribe. Make sure this story reaches everyone who needs it. A year after the episode aired, Steve was doing a speaking engagement about success and purpose. Someone in the audience asked him about his proudest moment in television. Steve didn't mention the awards. He didn't mention the ratings. He didn't mention the viral clips or the celebrity guests. He mentioned Doris. I've made millions of people laugh over my career, Steve said. But the proudest I've ever been was the day I stopped trying to make people laugh and just try to make one person feel seen. That's what this is all about. Not the fame, not the money, not the applause. It's about using whatever platform you have to remind people they matter, that their pain matters, that their story matters. He paused, looking out at the audience. Doris taught me that. Gene taught me that. They reminded me why I do what I do. And if I can make one person feel the way I made Doris feel that day, seen, heard, valued, then everything else is just noise. The truth about Steve Harvey is this. He understands loss. He understands what it's like to feel invisible, to feel like the world is moving on without you, to wonder if anyone notices you're drowning. And because he understands that, he refuses to let anyone feel that way in his presence. That's not something you can fake. That's not a character he plays for the cameras. That's who Steve Harvey is when the cameras are off, when the audience goes home, when the lights dim. That's the man Doris met that day. That's the man Gene would have been proud to call friend. Doris still watches Family Feud every night. She still sits in Gene's recliner. She still yells at the TV when someone gives a stupid answer. But now, when she laughs, it doesn't hurt. It feels like healing. And on the wall above the TV, she's hung a photo. It's her and Steve on that stage, his arm around her shoulder, both of them smiling. Underneath, a simple caption, "The day I learned to live again." Gene's group is still meeting every Tuesday. It's grown from 5 people to over 30. They've helped dozens of widows and widowers navigate the impossible landscape of grief. And every meeting ends the same way. Lights dim, TV on, Family Feud playing, and a room full of people learning to laugh again. Learning that it's okay to move forward. Learning that you can honor the dead by living fully. Learning that grief and joy can exist in the same heart, in the same moment, in the same breath. That's Gene's legacy. That's Doris's courage. That's Steve Harvey's gift. In a world that often tells us to move on quickly, to get over it, to be strong and silent, Steve Harvey stopped the show and said, "Your pain matters. Your story matters. You matter." And that simple act of compassion rippled out in ways no one could have predicted, touching lives, healing hearts, reminding people that kindness isn't weakness. It's the strongest thing we can offer each other. That's the power of seeing people, really seeing them. That's the legacy Steve Harvey is building, one-stop show at a time. This story is a fictionalized narrative crafted for inspirational and entertainment purposes. While inspired by the compassionate spirit often demonstrated by Steve Harvey, the specific events, characters, and details are dramatized and should not be considered factual accounts.